Welcome to the Kindle Chronicles, the Friday podcast about your Kindle, books, and all things Amazon. I'm Len Edgerly. Today is January 25th, 2019. Welcome to you from downtown Denver, Colorado, where this week I connected via Skype with Tim Harford, a senior columnist at the Financial Times in London, who inspired me to unplug from Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram until Groundhog Day. I think I'm about a week into this experiment. It turns out Tim is someone at the FT whom co-workers and editors turn to for advice on productivity tricks, and this has led him to think deeply about how we modern multitaskers spend our connected lives.
You can be super clever and have all your tricks, but fundamentally, everything in your life is crowding out something else in your life. And at some point, you have to choose, and the choice should be thoughtful.
Also this week, I'll have a live report from Washington State's Snohomish County. That is the only place in the world where you might have your Amazon package delivered by a cute little all-electric vehicle named Scout. I will also have a sad report on the apparent demise of one of my favorite members of the Echo family, as well as the Alexa skill of the week and a few good books I'm reading. Let's start the news with Amazon Scout. That is a cooler-sized, six-wheeled, all-electric autonomous delivery robot, which the company is testing in Snohomish County. That's north of Seattle. Scout was introduced in a blog post that contained a wordless video showing it in action on a quiet residential sidewalk. I watched it a few times, and then I asked Darlene to join me because I'm always curious in what her reaction is to some of the technology that I get so excited about.
I want to know what happens if the people aren't home.
Yeah. Does it look friendly?
Yeah.
Why does it look friendly?
It's blue.
Here she comes. Lid goes up. She reaches in, gets her package. It's like she doesn't know whether to thank it. She just looks at it and goes back.
Now, where does it go? Does it have more packages
goes on
in?
To the next house, yeah.
Well, how does the package come out?
I don't know. It must have some compartments.
It didn't look like it would hold much more than that one package.
Would you want that to come to your house?
It'd be a little hard since I live in a high-rise.
Whoops. All right, that's good. Thank you.
That was it?
That's it. How painless was that?
It was cute.
So that video opens with an aerial view of the robot, and you're looking down on it as it proceeds at a walking pace down the sidewalk. It has sort of a windshield in the front, so you can tell which is the front and which is the back. As Darlene noted, its calming Prime logo turquoise gives it a friendly look. It kind of reminds me of E.T. for some reason. I'm not exactly sure why. As it rolls along, there's a ribbon of white light that flashes around its top, kind of a pulsing action. It almost looks like maybe it's thinking, it's trying to find the house number. It stops in front of a home just as a woman strides out from the front door. She obviously knows that it's coming. Before she even reaches Scout, the robot has raised its lid, revealing a place where she can reach in for her package. The inside of the lid is orange with Amazon's smiling swoop on it. The customer fetches the package. She kind of looks at the lid as this. She's not really sure what's the protocol here. Do you thank the robot, or just she kind of nods and then she heads back into her home as the lid closes. With the lid closed, Scout continues down the sidewalk to its next delivery. Wired, as usual, had the best coverage of Scout's arrival. An article by Matt Simon and Ariel Pardes Gear noted that Amazon is very late to the ground-based delivery robot game. That surprised me. A company I've never heard of, Starship, was launched in 2014 and has logged 62,000 miles of driving. That was by October of 2017. Another robot named Kiwi has been delivering food around the UC Berkeley campus and occasionally has been catching fire, they reported. Scout's design challenge fascinates me. It reminds me of my getting to know that new robot from Anki. He's here on my desk named Vector, and Vector sits quietly in his electric dock until he sort of gets bored, and then he rolls out on his rubber treads to explore my desk. The Wired reporters wrote of Scout, quote, "It needs to look friendly enough that people won't kick it over, but not so friendly that kids run up and hug it and keep it from doing its job." When I saw that Scout is making its debut in Snohomish County, I checked with my friend Kess Woodward in Fairbanks because I thought his son Eli lived there. Sure enough, I'd remembered correctly, and I decided to give Eli a call to see if he spotted a friendly robot prowling his neighborhood.
Hi, Len.
Have I reached someone who actually lives in Snohomish County?
I do, yeah. We moved out to Snohomish County, gosh, I guess 5.5 years we've been out here.
And it looks like Everett is the main town there?
Yeah, Everett is the main town. Becca works out there. And, a lot of the people out where we live commute into Everett. And, yeah, it's the capital of the county.
I see. Well, these videos that I've seen of this Scout, which is they describe it as a cooler-sized electric autonomous delivery vehicle. It looks like it's on a sidewalk in a residential area. Would that probably be a residential area of Everett?
Well, it could be Everett. Plenty of the towns out here would be a good candidate for them, like Monroe, which is a town really kind of closest to us, has big developed neighborhoods with lots of sidewalks and things. And I think it would be either place would be pretty well mapped out for a little robot to scoot around on.
Now, I think you said you don't have sidewalks in your neighborhood, but if you saw one of these, what do you think your reaction would be?
I don't know. A little. I think I would wonder why someone hadn't already tipped it over, honestly.
It does look like a bit of a target.
Yeah.
The initial test, they say there's going to be a minder, so there'll be a human following along at a safe distance, probably to protect it from gangs.
Or just pranks. I know Seattle had these bike shares where they just kind of the streets have become semi-littered with bikes with stuff that you can hook your phone up to, and it unlocks the bike for you to use for a certain amount of time.
Right.
But if you move it without unlocking it, it talks to you. It says, "Oh, this is illegal. I'm calling the police." It's been an annoyance for people who clean the sidewalks and stuff and have to move these things off of private property. I know.
Have you got any deliveries coming your way from Amazon that could conceivably arrive via Scout?
Yeah, we have. My kid was just sick all over our duvet cover this morning, so we just happened to order a new duvet cover on Amazon that's supposed to get here sometime today. But we live about I guess 5 miles from Monroe, sort of out into the woods, and I wouldn't walk on the roads going between us to where you could get to a sidewalk. So I don't know that a little robot would do well either.
Yeah. Are you about 60 miles from Seattle, or from where the headquarters is?
We're not that far. It's only about a 45-minute drive into Seattle.
Yeah.
On, a no traffic.
Right. And they probably did some testing to figure out what kind of a neighborhood would be good for testing it out. But they look cute, though, because they go very slow in the video. It's got 6 wheels. And then when it gets to the person's house, the lid pops up and the woman gets her package. I assume that they'd have it so she can only get her package. She can't just reach into Santa's sack and pick any package she wants. But it does look sort of adorable.
Yeah, I looked up a picture of them. They do look like they look very friendly.
Yeah, they do. That's it.
They're certainly non-threatening, which is kind of probably what you want in a robot coming to your house. Yeah, and less threatening than a drone. They're testing the drones a lot in the UK and elsewhere, but the idea of a drone descending from the skies to your house would be perhaps more threatening than a Scout. Yeah, probably another reason why they might be considering, Snohomish County instead of Seattle is that certainly in a lot of Seattle, the sidewalks are pretty terrible. Huh. We lived on Capitol Hill before we came out here, and they did a really good job of planting all these trees and making Seattle such a great green city. But the trees' roots have all grown up and broken the sidewalk in just so much of Seattle. I think probably the more stereotypical sidewalks of Snohomish County in general would be a lot easier to program for. Yeah, fun. Well, that's a great
bit of feedback from the scene. And if you see one of these things and you want to snap a picture of it and send it to me, that would be pretty thrilling.
Yeah, I'll keep my eye out.
Okay, well, I hope Sage is better soon.
Thanks.
Thanks very much to Eli for that impromptu discussion of the Scout. I think I might have some other listeners in Snohomish County, so if you see one in your neighborhood and you want to snap a video of it and email it to me at podchronicles@gmail.com, I would appreciate it. The story that I mentioned, the demise of an Echo device, the Echo clock is something which I ordered. I've actually got one now here in Denver and at our home in Cambridge, and I love it. It's a very simple Bluetooth connection with the Echo Show that's on my desk, and I have taken as part of my New Year's resolutions to doing 10-minute little breaks where I just sit in my chair and I'm not doing any formal meditating. I'm just taking a time out, and every time at the end of 10 minutes, I just seem to have my head screwed on better. So this clock, when I say, set the timer for 10 minutes, lights go to advance to 10 minutes, and then as the countdown goes, each minute disappears and there's only one left, and then it goes to a circle all around the clock and the seconds tick off. So it's a nice visual representation of a timer. That's all it does. You can't talk to it like any other Echo device. Well, apparently there have been troubles with people not getting a good connection between their other Echo device, the one that actually has the AI in it, and the clock. So they've discontinued it. I just checked the website today and it says currently unavailable. We don't know when or if this item will be back in stock. So whatever the problem is, it seems to be kind of serious, and maybe this is an idea that just didn't work out. There are a lot of one-star reviews of people that are complaining that all of a sudden the clock just wouldn't work with their Echo device. So I'm glad I managed to buy two of these before they were discontinued. The one here in Denver does have a problem where a red dot goes on. When I looked up what that meant, it said it was a battery problem, but it's something a little funky there. But the timer itself has been rock solid and works every time I take a 10-minute break. For the tech tips, heard from Steve Lejos. On a side note, I had to send an item back, and instead of printing a return UPS label, they now send you a QR code, I believe it's called. All you have to do is go to the UPS store, and the store will scan the code right off your phone and generate a label, stick it on the package, and you are good to go. Gotta love technology. I haven't tried that yet, but that sounds pretty cool. It's pretty convenient to print off a label on my computer and then tape it to something I'm sending back, but even better to just have it on the phone and have that done by UPS. So a nice enhancement there that maybe I haven't seen in Denver yet. For the Alexa skill of the week, I am going to recommend the Starbucks skill, which I have used. And there's a drink that we had when we were in New Zealand called the Flat White, and that's available at Starbucks. It's a frothy thing. I don't know what the difference is between it and a latte, but it's my usual drink when I want to go treat myself, and there's a Starbucks right nearby. So this is how it works with the skill that I have set up. I'm using an Echo tap here. Alexa, open Starbucks.
Good evening, Len. Welcome back to Starbucks. Your order is a tall flat white from our store at 1512 Larimer Street. Your total with tax is $4.27 and will be applied to your primary Starbucks card. May I get this order started for you?
No.
If you would like to order something else, you'll need to log in and place another order using the Starbucks mobile app. Once you've picked up that order, you can come back and I can help you change your usual order. Thank you, Len. Have a great evening.
There you have it. If you're just ordering the same thing, it's drop dead simple. You just load it in once, but you have to order it with your actual Starbucks app, and then when you've paired your Starbucks account with your Alexa device or your Amazon account, it all happens as you just heard it. If you want to sometimes have a latte or a coffee, something different, you'd have to order that using the Starbucks app so that it's kind of in the Starbucks system. And then at that point, I could have told Starbucks via the Alexa to change my order. And then I'd be able to see the other ones. So it's pretty handy. And what I like is when I say I want that flat white, usually I can't get to the store fast enough, and it's just a block away. I have to go down the elevator out, and by the time I walk in, there's a drink sitting right there where the drinks are delivered, and it's got a little sticker on it with my name on it, so I can tell exactly what it is. Today was the first day in a while that I got there, and I actually had to stand there and wait for a minute for my flat white to show up with my name on it. But this is an example of a pretty elegant little connection between Alexa and something that I do a lot, so it gives me a chance to practice it, which I've said before I think is a key to use these skills in a way where they become natural enough that I actually use them, and then I have the experience of kind of expanding my Alexa repertoire. Time now for the interview with Tim Harford. He studied philosophy at Oxford before switching to economics, so I began by asking how his view of the current scene might have been different if he were considering it as a philosopher instead of as an economist who's a senior columnist at the Financial Times.
It's hard to say. It's a really interesting question. Of course, economics and philosophy used to be much more closely related than they now are, sadly. So Adam Smith wrote a great work of philosophy. John Stuart Mill was very active in economics. Keynes was also very interested in philosophy. So I guess I like to think that economics at its best is very engaged with the world. And it feels like it should be engaged with the world and engaged with everyday problems and everyday experiences. So maybe I could aspire to being one of those philosophers who has something useful to say about people's everyday lives, which some of them do.
Well, and you wade into that topic with your column about screen time, and what was the genesis of that? It looks like you started maybe in late November deleting Twitter from your phone and a few other things, but do you remember the thought process or the events that triggered your experiment with screens?
I'm always thinking about screens, but I was particularly impressed by a preview copy I got of Cal Newport's new book, Digital Minimalism. And for some reason, I have a sideline as the Financial Times' guru on personal productivity. So every now and then, my editors say, "Oh, please write us another one of your columns about how to deal with email." And I just thought, well, maybe it's time to do something more substantial and to have more of a rethink. And one of the things that impressed me about Newport's book was that he urges this real thoughtful engagement with how you use digital media. So not hacks and tactics, but from the ground up. What is it that you're trying to do? So I combined that with what I like to do anyway, which is to think about ideas in behavioral economics, which is the sort of the psychological wing of economics. So ideas about opportunity cost, ideas about temptation and short time horizons, impatience, all of these sorts of things. So that's where it all came from, and I've been having fun.
Explain the parameters of it. You stopped Twitter, and then what were the other things that you eliminated from your digital diet at that time?
Yeah, so the big one, because I've got nearly 150,000 Twitter followers, Twitter was the big one. And I never really checked Twitter on my phone, but I would tweet out from my phone. So I took the Twitter app off my phone, so I wasn't tempted to tweet out from my phone. I signed out of Twitter on my laptop as well, except for I said, all right, every Friday I'm going to log in, tweet some links to my columns, and log out again, which I did. Facebook was right out, although I was never very into Facebook, but also other things like news apps. I would often check the BBC News, for example, on my phone. Okay, I'm going to stop doing that. The blogs, I would read blogs on Feedly, which is a great blog reader app. Take that off. The idea being basically to take off everything, and this is both in your desktop browser and your phone, take off everything that is not essential. And then take a moment to think about what you're going to replace it with and be more thoughtful about your digital use. Now, this is something Newport urges. Some other people too. Jaron Lanier, for example, who has a great book. I think it's 10 Reasons to Delete Your Social Media Accounts Right Now. He also says you need to take a break. And I think it's important to take a break rather than just to say, I'm going to do a bit less, because it's the break that lets you break the status quo bias. One of the things I wrote about in my column, and just rethink what you're doing and reperceive what you're doing rather than operating out of pure habit, which can be very powerful.
One thing I noticed, because I was inspired to delete Twitter and not use it only until February 2nd, which is all I thought I could stand to be away from it. But I inadvertently saw something, I think in the FT, and I hit the share this as a tweet instinctively without even remembering that I had gone off it. And then I started noticing how strong a pull it was when I read something to want to put it out there. Something about my resonating with something that I see and then sharing it, although I very rarely hear back from anybody I'm sharing it with. But do you have any sense of, in your own experience, of what you're not having now that you aren't tweeting things out that interest you?
Well, I feel that I'm reading much more attentively. So even when I am reading, say, news on my phone, which I still do, I work for the Financial Times, I have the Financial Times app on my phone, I'm reading it because I want to learn, rather than, oh, this looks like it'll be tweetable. And I mean, one of the unforgivable things I used to do is I'd read a couple of paragraphs and then go, oh, that's a great pull quote. I'm going to grab that quote and I'm going to tweet it, and sometimes not even finish the piece. And that's just silly. And I'm not defending that behavior. That's just a bad habit. So that's something I've really enjoyed and appreciated, that I'm paying more attention to, to the stuff that I am reading. Now, I don't deny that there's benefits to Twitter. It was more a case of just trying to figure out, well, what was it costing me in terms of my attention, in terms of my focus on other things that mattered. And a lot of people make these changes on January the 1st. I found that actually doing it in late November accidentally was a sort of act of genius, unintended genius, because our rhythms are changing at that time of year anyway. There's more family, there's more old friends, you often send Christmas cards. You're very, very busy, but you're not busy with the usual work. It's more socializing and shopping for gifts. And so there was definitely that opportunity to break the old habits without it being too much of a wrench.
Yeah, kind of a transitional part of the year anyway.
Yeah.
One of the things that you thought might occur was, well, why not read a book if I have extra time because of these things? Do you think that you've read more books in the last 2 months than you normally would in that span of time?
I definitely have. I've read some excellent books. And it's the wonderful thing about my job, it's also the curse of my job, is that I read a lot purposefully. So I'm reading because I need to learn something, because it'll help my own writing. So right now I have a big stack of books. I have Hello World, which is a great book by Hannah Fry about algorithms. I have a book called The Art of Statistics by David Spiegelhalter, who I should say Professor Sir David Spiegelhalter, former president of the Royal Statistical Society. That book is not out yet, but it's coming very soon, and that's just a really, really accessible guide to statistics. David Wootton, The Invention of Science, this great big doorstep history of how we started thinking in a scientific way. And I also read quite quickly a book called Meltdown by Chris Clearfield, and he has a co-author. And that felt quite familiar because I've written about some of those ideas in my own writing. But that's about how systems go wrong, planes crash, nuclear power stations melt down, and what we can do to prevent those sorts of systemic breakdowns.
I've thought that some of your descriptions, especially you've told the story of the Keith Jarrett concert in Cologne a number of times with sort of novelistic detail. I mean, you put the reader right on the stage looking out when the piano is deemed to be unplayable. I notice you're not listing novels in what you're reading, and I've wondered, do you ever see yourself writing fiction, or what role, if any, does fiction play in how you are learning about the world?
I should read more novels. I used to be an avid reader of fiction when I was younger, but I don't read many these days. I read a lot of nonfiction. I feel vaguely guilty about that, but not guilty enough to change it. But I am very interested in stories, in storytelling. It's very kind what you said about my writing, and that is something I try to do, to really get people to empathize, to get people to ask, oh, what happens next? Is the hero going to triumph? Is the villain going to be vanquished? And I feel that those stories are wonderful ways to convey ideas about the kinds of things I'm trying to write about: psychology, business, economics, statistics, my interests. If you tell it in a story, it awakens people's sense of curiosity. They want to know what happens next. People remember much better, and they hopefully enjoy the books more. So that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, makes sense. Now, I noticed as you were talking about the titles you're reading, you were reaching for physical books. Are you also reading on Kindle or listening to audiobooks when you're encountering books?
I read the Chris Clearfield book Meltdown on Kindle because I needed to get hold of it in a hurry, and it was super cheap on Kindle, and I could just start reading right there. My preference is always for a physical book. I like the affordances. I like being able to fold over the pages, that kind of thing. But the Kindle is a very simple, practical way to read. So I would say I'm probably 80-20 in terms of my book consumption, physical versus Kindle. I listen a lot to podcasts, and so if I'm listening to something, it's a podcast rather than an audiobook. Although a lot of friends of mine are telling me that audiobooks are great, so maybe I should give them a try.
Yeah. Well, your project to simplify your digital life, it's an interesting follow-up to your 2016 book, Messy, The Power of Disorder to Transform Our Lives. You're sort of making the case for messiness in that book, and now you're kind of on the simplifying, sort of the Marie Kondo side of things. How do these two relate to each other?
Yeah, I sometimes get dragged out as the anti-Marie Kondo, although as I, especially she's got this Netflix series now, everyone's talking about her again, so I get dragged out again. Actually, I think her ideas are really great, but they're limited. And one of the points that I make in Messy is that we're very attracted by the desire to tidy things up and the desire to impose organizational systems and structures, and sometimes it just doesn't work. So one of the things I'm in complete agreement with Marie Kondo about is that organizational systems are overrated. So she says, look, you can't just buy a filing cabinet and a clever organizer and so on. If you've got too much stuff, you've got too much stuff. And so I'm in total agreement with that. And actually the same kind of thinking motivates the digital minimalism book. Cal Newport's book motivated my own digital rethink. It's the same thing. Oh, you can be super clever and have all your tricks, but fundamentally everything in your life is crowding out something else in your life, and at some point you have to choose, and the choice should be thoughtful. So that's kind of my relationship with Kondo. Where do I think her ideas are limited? Well, she doesn't understand books, for a start. She just doesn't seem
30 books.
Yeah, she just doesn't seem to get it. Some people sort of fetishize books a bit too much, and they hold on to books that they're never going to read ever again. But no, you need a lot more. I can see 30 books behind you right now, and I'm surrounded by books myself. But it's not just books. So think about email. Marie Kondo doesn't seem to operate in that world, but the same thing applies. You've got a big inbox, emails coming in all the time. So Marie Kondo's method is basically look at the email and ask yourself, do I want to keep this or not? Does this email spark joy? I mean, leave aside the spark joy thing, but just like, do I or do I not want this email in my life? And the answer is, well, maybe now for a bit, and then maybe I need to get rid of it, or maybe I need to file it. It's the same thing with a lot of paperwork. It's actually the same thing with a lot of books. They come into our lives, and we need them temporarily. And so one of the arguments about Messy, I mean, it's a very varied book. There's a messy book. There's a lot of different ideas in it. But one of the ideas in Messy is that you can file stuff too quickly. You can try to impose an organizational system on stuff prematurely. There is a thing called premature filing. And if you just let stuff pile up on your desk a bit, it can actually be a highly effective way to deal with paperwork. And that's not just my opinion. There's some pretty good research on this. So yeah, Marie Kondo, great for your wardrobe, great for your kitchen, maybe not so good for your office.
There's a fascinating chapter in the Messy book titled Winning, and you compare Jeff Bezos, Donald Trump, and Erwin Rommel. That's the desert fox. What do they have in common?
Yeah, and I should say that was written and published before Trump's victory, but after he was clearly going to win the Republican nomination.
Yeah.
So what do they have in common? What they have in common is a willingness to cope with chaos and possibly inefficiency, possibly problems in their own organizations in order to gain a competitive advantage. So it's clearest in the case of Rommel, who it's weird writing about Rommel, who was just, I mean, he worked for Adolf Hitler and he spent a lot of time kicking the British army backwards and forwards across Africa. So as a Brit, I'm reading this and yet it's impossible not to sympathize with him. He's a remarkable leader. And what he would do is he would often say, well, look, we need to act now because we would catch our enemy in confusion. And his troops will say, well, we don't have fuel, we're not organized, we haven't rested, we need some time to get ourselves together. And he would say, no, now is the time. Even if you're not together, even if it's chaos here, it'll be even more chaotic on the other side. And he was proved correct in that judgment again and again and again and again. And ironically, only defeated when he started paying real close attention to logistics, not realizing that the British had cracked his codes. And so every logistical message they were following, they were tracking his every move. There's a similarity with Jeff Bezos, particularly the early years of Amazon. He was very, very clear when he moved, for example, when he originally set up this great online bookstore, and then when he moved into toys and kitchenware, DVDs, each time people would say, you need to slow down, the systems aren't ready. And he would say, no, we need to move now, and we need to move now because if we're too slow, Barnes & Noble will crush us. I mean, people really thought Barnes & Noble were absolutely going to destroy Amazon. And Bezos was very thoughtful about this. He said, it will take them a while. They're a big company. They've got a lot to lose. It'll take them a while. And so we can win, but we can only win if we're fast. And I think if you'd been working at Amazon at the time, to judge from Brad Stone's History of Amazon, which is it's a great book I'm sure you've read.
Yes.
To judge from Stone's descriptions of what it was like working for Amazon in those early days, if you'd just been there, you would have gone, this is insane. This is chaos. It's out of control. Everything's the knives are sort of shooting down the chutes in the Amazon warehouse, and the computer system is saying, is this knife a hardback or a paperback? But he was right. He made that judgment. And Trump as well, very much. I don't care if my message is a bit imperfect, if it's a bit impromptu, if I make some mistakes, it doesn't matter because Jeb Bush isn't quick enough. Everything I say, he'll take 3 days to respond to, and I can change the news cycle every 6 hours, and he did, and continues to do.
As I thought about the three, it's a fascinating comparison. The difference that I think exists, at least in how Bezos presents himself to employees and to journalists, he says always focus on the customer, forget the competitor. And compared with, Rommel clearly had an enemy, and Trump knew who his enemies were, his competitors. But maybe that doesn't really change your observation that it's the improvising through chaos, and whether or not Bezos was as focused on defeating a competitor as the other two, but maybe that would make a difference. I wonder if that's a difference that is significant.
Yeah, I mean, it is important to know what the mission is. And one of the other remarkable characters I interviewed for an earlier book, Adapt, I managed to very briefly interview David Petraeus, who was, of course, responsible for the surge in Iraq. And he said, it was a very brief interview, but one of the points he made was you need to get the big picture right. You need everybody in your organization to understand what you're trying to do. So that's clearly what is motivating Bezos, and we need to focus on the customer. But I still think it is. He may tell that to his staff, but in the first 5 years of Amazon, he was very, very focused on what his customers were doing, on what his competitors were doing, and thinking about having to act quickly, even though they weren't ready, because that was the way to wrong-foot his competitors. And that's if Brad Stone is correct about what he wrote about Amazon, that was very, very clear.
Yeah, and in fact, Brad tells the story of the hilarious meeting between Bezos and the Len Riggio of Barnes & Noble, and them basically saying, well, you better join with us or else we're going to bury you. And Bezos left thinking, well, I've maybe got a year or two to improve this online book-selling site to the point where I might be kind of difficult to bury.
Yeah. Absolutely. He was definitely thinking about his competitors intently in those early years. He probably still is, but the relationship's a little different now.
Well, there's a fascinating candidate here in Colorado, the governor, John Hickenlooper, brewpub founder, geologist, was mayor of Denver, and a funny guy, just a quirky guy. And I've having read what you wrote about Trump in that chapter, I thought, well, how could Hickenlooper or one of the other 20 candidates that are going to line up for the Democrats use that same mess as a competitive weapon against Trump in 2020? And you've written some about kind of political candidates and, things that would be nice if a candidate would say, well, here's some ideas, but I don't know which one will work. But have you thought ahead in a strategic way using what you learned in writing that book as to how someone might effectively compete against Trump in 2020?
Yeah, well, I think there's got to be a willingness to improvise. And I mean, that was one of the things that really did for Marco Rubio, for example, just this sense that he was on this loop, and he would give the same speech every time. And of course, they all do that. They all give the same speech every time, right? But that he couldn't respond to what was in front of him. So that, I think, is really important. And of course, it involves risk. And it's the same risk that we take in our own lives when we have a proper heart-to-heart, face-to-face conversation with somebody that isn't just ritualistic. One of the observations that I make in the book is that text messaging and digital messaging is very, very comforting for a lot of people because you can think about what you're going to say. But it's a more risky but a more genuine experience to be listening, responding in the moment. And that's what we expect from the human beings that we talk to, and it's what we really hope from our political leaders. And one of the stories that I tell, I know as we're recording this podcast, it's Martin Luther King Day in America. One of the stories I tell is about Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech, and other speeches that he gave, and the role of improvisation in Martin Luther King's speaking style. And he didn't want to do that at first. It was his speeches were brilliant, but very, very highly polished. And it was only when he was kind of bounced into the civil rights movement that he no longer had time to write every word out. He had to start improvising, accepting imperfections in what he said, and that some of the lines wouldn't come out quite right, and yet the overall effect was much more powerful, much more genuine, because the people he was talking to could hear that he was responding to them, and that's part of the story of I Have a Dream. Of course, he was a unique speaker, a uniquely gifted speaker, and a remarkable man in other ways, but it was partly his willingness to improvise, which requires paying attention to what is going on at the particular moment and responding.
Exactly. Well, your podcast, 50 Things That Make the Modern Economy, you're coming up with your second season, and when is that going to be available to people?
So the podcast is, the new season is coming out the end of March.
Uh-huh. And have you made any changes in the approach to it that people that have followed it for the first season will notice?
Well, we had a couple of whimsical ones. So I've already written one on Santa Claus. Uh-huh. How did Santa Claus change the modern economy? I've written one about beehives. But no, the first season was great to work on. It was a real pleasure. It's been wonderful to be writing again. They're lovely little, although I say so myself, they're lovely little portraits of, there's a person, an idea, a place, with an economic lesson behind it. So to write about the barcode, for example, or the bicycle, or blockchain, or fire, to write about the invention of a particular thing, and then to say, well, what does this thing teach us about the economy around us? It's really fun, because a lot of economic writing and a lot of economics is necessarily abstract. So it's great to give it a time and a place and put some faces to these ideas as well. I should say, by the way, that as well as the podcast, there is a book. I think the US edition is 50 Inventions That Shaped the Modern Economy. So if people want to read about it rather than listen to the podcast, the book is quite similar content.
If you look at, imagine you're working on the third or fourth or 10th season of that show, and you're looking back at things that Jeff Bezos and Amazon invented. Which one do you think might be most likely to show up on somebody's review of the things which made the modern economy?
Well, I can imagine writing something about cloud computing, not an invention of Amazon, but cloud computing, obviously a huge product for Amazon. But I think I would be talking about the retail delivery system, this whole the website, the whole system of logistics. Because one of the fun things about that series, 50 Things That Made the Modern Economy, is you don't just have to think of a physical invention. It can be a system. So one of my favorite inventions was the shipping container. And as an invention, it's actually been invented many times. But as a system that was actually made to stick, it was made to stick by an entrepreneur called Malcolm McLean, who in some ways reminds me of Jeff Bezos. Very clever, willing to take risks, to strike deals, politically savvy. And he just put that, because the system doesn't work unless it is a system. You need the trucks and the trains and the boats and the cranes, the ports. You need the whole thing to work, otherwise nothing works. So I guess I would be writing about the whole system behind Amazon delivery.
How about Alexa? Are you using Alexa in your own home? What do you see it's the significance of that?
So, voices seems to be where it is in the future. We see that in our phones. We see that in Alexa. I don't have Alexa myself, not yet. I'm often a little late to adopt. I wait for the kinks to be ironed out and then pick something up. But a friend of mine who's writes fantasy novels and also fantasy games. So he wrote a lot of the Choose Your Own Adventure game books in the 1980s that were big in the 1980s. He was, I'm going to get the details wrong, but he was, I believe, commissioned by Amazon to write a Halloween game for Alexa. And I don't know if it's still active or whether they'll switch it on again next Halloween. But if you asked Alexa to play Fright Tonight, there was this whole interactive game that you could play. And that was the killer app for me. That was thinking, I must get Alexa just to play this experience. And when you think about that, that's a really interesting thing, because you've got the interactivity, but you've got this immersive, you've got voices, actors speaking to you. A really interesting combination of making the technology work to deliver a different kind of creative form.
Yeah, exactly. Anything else you'd like to mention that we haven't discussed?
I think we talked about both books. We talked about the podcasts. I'm at timharford.com. If people want to check out my writing, subscribe to my website. I guess the only other thing to mention is Harford is spelled Harford, not Hartford. I'm not a town in Connecticut.
Or Harvard.
I wish I was called Tim Harford. That would be nice. But so that's where you can find me. You can always follow me on Twitter, but at the moment I'm pretty quiet.
Your Twitter following appears to have increased 100 people since you stopped using it.
Maybe some of them are Russian bots. Who knows?
That's good. I have been speaking with the real Tim Harford, a senior columnist at the Financial Times and the author of Messy, The Power of Disorder to Transform Our Lives. Thanks very much, Tim.
It's great to talk to you.
As usual, a lot of my reading currently is of books that I hope I will be talking with the authors in the coming weeks. One is a new novel, Early Riser, which is going to be released in February by Jasper Fforde. He's from Wales. He hasn't written a novel in 6 years. It's very popular. And this is a book about a time when people hibernate. Most of the population hibernates during the winter, and a few people have to take care of them. Very well written. I'm liking it at the start. Also on my Kindle is a book by John Hickenlooper, who just finished his second term as governor of Colorado. It's The Opposite of Woe, My Life in Beer and Politics. He's somebody who I think is going to run for president, and I'm kind of excited about the prospect. I'll be talking about that in the future. I haven't ever really strayed into politics on this podcast, but if Hickenlooper runs, I'm going to have to figure out a new way of managing that particular boundary. He's just a terrific guy, and the book is a really good read. The other book is This is Marketing. You Can't Be Seen Until You Learn to See. That's by Seth Godin, who is a giant in the realm of marketing and kind of motivational books. He's just got a real earnest way to talk about getting your life back on track. He's the guy that really inspired me to do ebooks for troops years ago, and he's been on the show a couple of times quite a while ago, and I'm very excited that he's going to be talking with me next week about this book, which he published in November. Seth Godin, next week. I'll say that in resonance with Tim Harford's message about messiness, I'm going to slip a little bit from 4458. That's been a nice parameter, and I'm not going to go crazy one way or the other, but it feels a little scary to see that I'm going up to 45 minutes and over. That's a little messy, and who knows, there could be some creativity lurking there as I test some of these boundaries that I've kept myself constrained by pretty carefully over the years. This is Len Edgerly for the Kindle Chronicles from Denver, Colorado. I really appreciate your listening to my show. Have a great day. Bye.